Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I have swatches for you from Pampered Polish. So this is their holiday collection. This will be releasing today as I'm uploading it on December 2nd. So these are all holographic polishes. There are 8 polishes in this collection and then a set of 7 more of those pop pots, which are just little pots of glitter. I'll link in the description box below my Instagram page where I will have more swatches of everything in this collection. And then on my Instagram page I'll also show you what is in each of the pop pots. And I did do a manicure with each of them, and those will be all on my Instagram page, so check that out please. Also in the description box below I will link Pampered Polishes Instagram page as well as their Etsy shop. So like I said, 8 polishes, and let's get started. So first up we have Luminary, and this is the kind of like gold champagne brown holographic polish. So here's our first coat of Luminary. And this has a nice formula. It's very easy to use. All of these are on the thinner side though, so if you're not careful they will start going into your cuticles and running down the sides of your nails. It is sheer on this first coat, so I will go in for a second. Here's our second coat of Luminary. This builds up nicely on 2 coats, but it is not completely opaque, so I am going to go ahead and do a third coat. These all dry down decently glassy, but I do recommend a top coat as well. Here's our third coat of Luminary, and this does cover completely in 3 coats for me. For all my swatches today, I did use Pampered Polishes liquid glass top coat as well. And these do dry more hollow than they apply. So there's 3 coats. Up next we have Twinkling Lights, and this one is just a little bit lighter than the last one. It has less brown and more like gold, and this is also a linear holographic polish. And here's our first coat of Twinkling Lights. Again, this is very sheer in the first coat. It does build up pretty nicely in 3 coats, but you might even need 4 coats for this. And here's our second coat of Twinkling Lights. It does have the same thinner formula, so be careful when you work with it. This one might be useful as a top coat, but depending on what you do and don't like, you might need 4. So there's 3 coats. Next up we have Champagne Fountain, and this is again a lot like the last 2 polishes. It is a little bit lighter, a little bit less gold, a little bit more champagne, and a linear holographic. Here's our first coat of Champagne Fountain, and this is again a very sheer polish on the first coat. It does take 2 to 3 depending on your application to get completely opaque. So here's our second coat, and I am going to do 2 coats and stop here because it is pretty much opaque for me. It does have that same thinner formula, but it's not too hard to use if you're aware that it is pretty thin. Again, it dries decently glossy. I recommend a top coat, and it does dry more hollow than it applies. So there's 2 coats. So I did want to show you the difference in these real quick because I know they are all very similar. Here we have Champagne Fountain, Twinkling Lights, and Luminary. Obviously Luminary is a lot darker than the other 2. And then Twinkling Lights and Champagne Fountain are definitely very similar. The Champagne Fountain is, more of that champagne, and then Twinkling Lights is a little bit more gold. They're just kind of like a shade off with a different shimmer. I think they're different enough to own both, but that is your discretion. Next up we have Sweater Weather, and this is a medium blue linear holographic. It is showing up a little bit less bright on camera than it is on person. And here's our first coat of Sweater Weather. And this one goes on more opaque than the other 2, but it is still a little bit sheer, so I am going to go in for a second coat. It does have that same thinner formula, so be careful when you use it. I did want to say that the last hollows I experienced quite a bit of staining, but none of these hollows so far have stained me. Again, this one does dry decently glossy, and it dries more hollow than it applies. So there's 2 coats. Next up we have Blue Spruce, and this is almost a teal, a little bit darker than teal, linear holographic. Here's our first coat of Blue Spruce. And this is very similar to the last polish in color and in formula. It is pretty easy to work with though if you're aware that it's a thinner formula, and it does want to run down the sides of your nails, so you can't exactly do a thick coat of any of these just like that. So here's our second coat of Blue Spruce, and this one does cover completely in 2 coats for me. Again, no staining here. Again, dries more hollow than it applies. These do dry decently quick and decently glossy, so there's 2 coats. Up next we have Olive Branch, and this is a army olivey green with that same linear holographic. And here's our first coat of Olive Branch. This is just like the last couple of polishes. It is a little bit sheer on this first coat, but not nearly as sheer as the first few polishes. It does have that thinner formula, so you've got to be careful with the application. Nice thin coats, just build it up. This is our first coat, and here's our second coat of Olive Branch. For me, this one is completely opaque in 2 coats. Again, it's going to dry more hollow than it applies, so keep that in mind. It doesn't look very hollow here, but it is. So there's 2 coats. Up next we have Mistletoe, and this is your standard Christmas green color with that same linear holographic shift. Here's our first coat of Mistletoe. This one's actually very, very nicely opaque on the first coat, more opaque than the rest of them so far. I can still see my nail line just a little bit though, so I am going to go in for a second coat and cover up some of those streaks. Here's our second coat, and this one does become completely opaque in 2 coats. It does still have that thinner formula. I didn't experience any staining with this either. It does dry fairly glossy and fairly quick. I do recommend a good top coat for it though. Again, that hollow will really come through as soon as it's dry, so there's 2 coats. And lastly for today we have Poinsettia, and this is a bright Santa red with that same linear holographic shift. You can see the linear hollow best here on the sides if you have been looking. Here's our first coat of Poinsettia, and this has the best coverage of all of them in this collection. You probably could get away with 1 coat if you're not a super stickler for nail lines. I am going to go in for a second coat. It does deepen the color a little bit, and it does cover up that nail line completely for me, so I prefer this on 2 coats. It also has a tiny bit thicker of a formula than the rest of the polishes in this collection, but it's not thick by any means, and it is still just a little bit thin, so still be careful with that application. So here's our second coat. It does cover completely in 2 coats. I will say that this was the hardest polish for me to capture the hollow in. It's there very much so in the bottle, but not as much on the nail. So there's 2 coats. So of the 8, I am choosing Luminary as my favorite. It is very beautiful. It does take 3 coats to be completely opaque, but I am happy to do those 3 coats for a color that I really like. So I am choosing Luminary. And that is it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this collection. Let me know if you plan on picking anything up. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to see more from me. And I will talk to you again next time. Bye.